Welcome to MSP Unplugged, cyber insurance with the Brunsgroup. I am your host, Paco LeBron. This is our live show where we discuss different ways to run your IT business, whether it's managed services, consulting, break fix, or anything in between. Let me go ahead and introduce our co-host slash guest. We have Joe Brunsman from the Brunsgroup. Joe, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you doing?
You know me, better than good, better than most is what I like to say around in the show. And since John's not around, we also say better than I deserve, just to keep the spirit going. But before we go into the live interview, Joe, and kind of talk a little bit more about cyber insurance and the awful landscape of what we have to try and go around and kind of meander around, we're going to go and talk about my favorite thing is TechCon Unplugged. TechCon Unplugged is going to be this September 17th to the 19th. It is our in-person show at the Aloft Hotel, and that's going to be the Aloft Chicago O'Hare Hotel over near in Rosemont, Illinois. Learn from amazing panels to help maintain and improve your business, meet vendors to find products, services that save you time and money, rub elbows with your peers in the community. And I think one of the biggest things that have been a really big highlight, a lot of people, we appreciate your ticket purchases as we get closer to the event, is our Microsoft 365 bootcamp / workshop. I think that's going to be one of the bigger highlights where it's a limited event. So it's only available for the first ticket purchasers. And really, we're going to go over how to leverage Microsoft 365. More importantly, Endpoint Manager, formerly known as Intune, understanding what Azure Active Directory does, and actually have a hands-on availability with our own cyber Matt Lee, who was gracious enough to help this boot camp. And if you don't know about Matt Lee, feel free to go ahead and head to our website. Has a little bit of his insights of what he does. Also, he has done quite a few of these boot camps in its different varieties with other third-party vendors as well. So definitely knows his stuff. It's going to be a real great atmosphere and really a good hands-on workshop that we're going to have available. And then I think the other piece that I'm really excited about is how to design and document your network. It's going to bring some really great actionable items that are really going to bring it to everyone as they leave for the conference after 2.5 days of learning and fun. And that's really what we're here about. I think the biggest piece here is that we want to make sure that we send you back with actionable items to help improve your small business, whether you are a one-man shop or a business owner with employees. So if you are interested or have not bought your tickets yet, because I think we're about a few slots left with the Microsoft 365 Business Bootcamp. So just because we had to reach out and some of the previous ticket purchasers had other guests and wives and things of that nature that may not be sitting in. So definitely take advantage. Head over to techconunplugged.com. Tickets are $199, and we hope to see you there September 17th to the 19th. All right. So, Joe, again, really appreciate you coming on the show. I actually heard you over at our good friends over at Channel Pro Network. You were on a podcast recently with Matt Whitlock and Rich Freeman, really discussing about cyber insurance. And you give a very different perspective because you are actually in cyber insurance law. And that's really something that, one, I never had heard about before. And two, you really give a lot of great information and understanding of what that really means, right? But before we get into all that, why don't you kind of introduce yourself to the audience and talk a little bit about how you got into the space and then how you started the Brunsgroup?
Sure. So I am Joe Brunsman. I am the guy running the show over here at the Brunsgroup. So we're an insurance brokerage, ostensibly. We do a lot of work. Really, I'd say like my passion is actually teaching people, and insurance is kind of just the avenue by which that happens. How I got into all this, I guess, long story short, is I'm a former IT. So I enlisted back in 2003 in the Navy to become an IT. So that's really where I started learning about cybersecurity, networks, all that kind of thing. When I went to the academy, I got my degree in robotics. So I got to make a beer launching fridge, which was a ton of fun, and learned even more about technology. So I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Nice.
After I got out of the Navy, I went and got my master's in cybersecurity law. And I guess the secret there that I will put out here is I didn't actually learn that much getting my master's in cybersecurity law because I was already so fascinated with this topic just because of my background plus insurance that I'd pretty much already published articles on just about every class I took there, with a few exceptions. And then following, really graduation, I think I now hold the record for the longest master's thesis ever submitted at the Carey School of Law. So if you look behind me, so that book right there, that was my master's thesis. So it's about 500 pages, and it's all about cyber insurance and cybersecurity law. And so, when you kind of take my background in E&O insurance plus my background in cyber insurance, you smush those together, and that is essentially tech E&O insurance for MSPs, right? So it was a field where I still get to nerd out a little bit because I still love the technology side, but then I see a lot of MSPs making very, very significant or material mistakes. And that's really because, up until a couple of years ago, I could have been saying the same exact things and nobody would have cared because it wasn't really that big of a problem, right? So even if you go back in the case law, trying to find an MSP that got sued for something is incredibly difficult to do. Whereas now it's obviously, you don't have to take my word for it, right? The big brains at the insurance companies that have, tons of attorneys and actuaries just pouring over all this information, they're just bailing left and right because they're like, it's either getting way too dangerous for us to even offer a quote. So they're just leaving the line entirely, not offering tech E&O to MSPs anymore. Or they're saying like, hey, we got to crank up the premiums here because this is going to get a lot more dangerous moving forward. So it's a lot of what I do is obviously selling the insurance policy, but I like to teach MSPs, like, how do you actually comply with the policy? What are the kind of the major stumbling blocks? How do you avoid using your policy to begin with, right? Or minimizes the chances thereof. So that's, I guess, kind of the long intro.
Sure. No, I mean, you're right. I think that the fact that a lot of us, preaching to the choir, that we've really been harping on cybersecurity for so long, and it wasn't until probably in the last really 2 years have really become a serious, even 3 years, that really people have gotten eyes on it, especially over the last couple months. I can tell you that I think, everyone kind of, it's a beaten dead horse, but at the same time, I think July 4th, that incident that happened made all the media waves with the unfortunate hack with Kaseya. And now clients are seeing that on, the regular news. And now it's trickling down where people are really understanding on how serious this is all going to be, or it's becoming, or has been. And I think you said it best, where really trying to understand how to navigate this has become much more difficult, especially with those that are doing it right and getting the right insurance for their business, getting to make sure that they are kept, in a quote unquote safety bubble as much as possible, where, oh, I got insurance, it should be okay. But now we're not noticing in the past year, either, like you said, policies are not getting renewed because they're either dropping out completely. They think it's too big of a risk, or the premiums have been jacked so high that that's the only way for them to stay in the game. And us, over here at Prodigy Tech suffer that as much, where our insurance policy went up 3 times compared to what we were paying the previous year. So it's definitely being felt all around. But, I think also, and I think you kind of hinted at this, is that, as MSPs or IT business owners, we don't really understand a lot about cyber insurance. We assume from other people are telling us what we need to get. We're trusting our brokers. We're trusting third-party, security awareness training vendors that are saying, "Hey, sell cyber insurance to your clients. It's a great, it's a great monetary value to add to your monthly recurring revenue." And then we're assuming, okay, well, we'll get cyber insurance too, because, that's, everyone needs it. So we got to get it too. So I think this whole cyber insurance has been beaten to us for so long without a clarity of understanding it. I assume, from you hinting at this before, this has become a pretty big problem in our space, right? Because of trying to understand that. What have you seen, at least? Maybe I'll let you kind of drive on what you've seen in the space so far with cyber insurance and IT business owners.
Yeah, so it's there's kind of a couple problems that I'm seeing, right? First is I'm never really a fan of MSPs trying to sell cyber insurance or be a reseller of cyber insurance, because I mean, you got to think, like, if someone was like, "Hey, my insurance guy is selling a backup solution," you'd be like, "What? Like, that doesn't even make any sense. Like, what's this guy doing?" And for MSPs, you have to think that, one, there's kind of a couple issues with doing that, right? One is you're going from really an industry that has zero regulation. That's going to change, but currently has zero regulation. Now you're trying to dip your toe into the most heavily regulated industry in the world, which is insurance, right? So one of the mechanisms, like having your clients purchase cyber insurance, is actually really a good idea. Now, selling it to them is probably a very bad idea. And one of the primary reasons, outside of the legality of if you're even allowed to do that without a specific insurance policy on top of what you already have, right, plus a specific license and kind of all the issues there, is when you are contractually requiring clients to carry cyber insurance, you're trying to transfer the risk over as many parties as possible, right? But if your MSP is selling the same cyber insurance to every client, one, you have to think, okay, is that even the right policy? Which it probably isn't, right? Two, does it have the right limits? I mean, there's all of these variables, but the biggest issue here is, let's say you have 10 clients, right? And we'll go disaster scenario. Bad guy goes through your RMM, hits all of your clients with ransomware. You have 10 clients, and for the sake of argument, we'll say each suffers $100,000 loss. If that's with, like, say, 9 or 10 different cyber insurance companies, the probability a cyber insurance company is going to, we'll call it, subrogate the rights of your client, right? And then come back and sue your MSP to recover that money that they shelled out. Probably not going to happen over 100 grand. That's just kind of a normal day in cyber insurance, unfortunately. Now, if all 10 of those clients have the same cyber insurance company, that's $1 million loss. So I think the risk, essentially what you're doing is you're trying to spread the risk through cyber insurance, but what you're doing is you're aggregating that risk back to one insurance company. So it's just kind of like a bad idea all around. And the other issue is, you really need to kind of understand the different types of insurance and generally kind of what they do. So if anybody's interested, I do have a YouTube channel. I have a video that I put out, and it's just a plain language insurance breakdown of all the most common types of insurance you're going to see. Right. So I'm a business owner. I'm sure everybody here is watching this is probably a business owner as well. And you start a business and you're like, there's all of these different types of insurance. Only certain people do different types of insurance. They don't do the other types. Like, how do I even begin to understand? Like, do I need a general liability policy or a business owner's policy? Do I need a cyber policy or a tech E&O policy? So they can look that up there. But the thing that I think everybody should understand is, except in very, very rare circumstances, like I had a guy reach out to me in American Samoa, and he's the only exception I have ever come across, because there was just nobody else there that was actually an insurance company to help him. But everybody else, minus extreme circumstance, if you have an E&O policy and a cyber policy, you are wrong. Right? That means 99 times out of 100, you bought that from your general insurance agent. He doesn't know what tech E&O is, and you're going to get burned. The biggest issue there is, if something occurs, there could be an overlap in those coverages, right? And this is why, even for your own clients, they really need to work with someone who specializes in this field, because there's something called a mutually repugnant to other insurance clause. And without getting too nerdy, think about it this way, right? Let's say you buy a house and you buy 2 homeowners policies, and then your house burns down, right? Do you think that you would get twice the value of your home back in insurance?
Negative.
Yeah, probably not, right? Because you're like, you're not supposed to be able to profit from insurance, right? That leads to all kinds of bad things with, like, encouraging arson and all types of stuff.
Sure.
So what happens for an MSP is, if you have these 2 different policies that could cover the same thing, if you get sued, there could be some overlap there, which means you may end up paying both deductibles, which you probably didn't plan for. And now you have to deal with 2 different defense teams, and you got to run all that stuff through you, right? So like, what happens if your E&O guys go, hey, you know what, we're just going to settle this, not a chance we're going to win. And then your cyber guys are like, dude, we're going to fight this tooth and nail. There's no chance we're going to lose, right? Like, and then you're just kind of stuck in the middle, right? And the most insurance you're probably going to get is whatever the highest is on one of those policies. So it's just, there's numerous other technical reasons that I won't bore you with, but it's just kind of a bad idea. So for MSPs, they just need to understand, okay, what's really the difference between tech E&O and cyber insurance, right? So fundamentally, what is cyber insurance? Well, there is a liability side to cyber insurance. The best way to think of that is somebody sues you after a breach, right, of their information for, let's say, the stress and heartache that they had to deal with to lock their credit score down or something like that, right? It's incredibly rare. A tech E&O policy, liability side there would be somebody is going to come after you because they're alleging some wrongful act you committed while providing professional services, right? So instead of, so cyber claim would be, I had all this stress, my identity got stolen because you were the only guy who ever had my social security number and someone bought a house in my name. Tech E&O side would be, hey, you misconfigured this firewall. Because of that, my business got hit with ransomware. Through that, I suffered, let's say, the average 16 days of business interruption plus forensics and et cetera, et cetera. I'm now going to sue your MSP to try and recoup those funds. Right? So there's a very large difference between the two. And I just want to make sure that MSPs really understand that they need to be looking for a tech E&O policy. That's the most common mistake I see, outside of just not having insurance at all.
Right. So as far as for those 2 scenarios that you explained, are those 2 in that YouTube video you mentioned, or are they separate videos that we can post show note links to make sure that those that wanted to go into a little bit more granular detail to kind of learn a little bit more?
Yeah, so the first one was a plain language insurance breakdown for fellow business owners. The second one is going to be, I think it's called the most common insurance mistake I see MSPs making, or something to that effect. I'll shoot them over to you.
Sounds good. And then we'll have we'll update those in the show notes for those that want to go dive into it a little bit more in detail. Now it looks like we got a question here from Mike Wise, and it says, you know, what can we as MSPs protect ourselves from subrogation? Okay, so yeah, easy way to explain that, right? What is subrogation? Subrogation is, well, I'll give you a easy example because some guy just sideswiped my brand new Tacoma and I had to get that fixed. Yeah, less than 4,000 miles on my new 2021 Tacoma. So I'm pulling out of a spot, guy just tears around a corner, doesn't stop at a stop sign, sideswipes my truck, right? So now my insurance company is going, hey, this was not Joe's fault. It was the other guy's fault. And Joe now has to pay his deductible to fix his truck, right? So now my insurance company, they subrogate my rights. So they're taking my rights as an individual to effectively sue the guy that hit my truck for my deductible, right? So they're recouping that money for me. And at that point, it's just kind of a back and forth. So there are, I should say, mechanisms in which case you can have like waivers of subrogation and things like that. That's kind of too far down the line, I think, for most MSPs to think about. I have I guess another video which I'll send to you, but it's called Defense in Depth for your MSP, right? It's called Get Smart. So there's other mechanisms I think that should come into play before you really start talking to an attorney about waivers of subrogation and kind of all that stuff, because your client's insurance companies may not even agree to that, right? So you got to be, that starts getting very technical on if you can do it, how to do it, the state you're in, et cetera, et cetera. Sure.
So there's kind of a bunch of other things I think MSP should be doing, right? An easy one is, well, let's think, what are the 3 parts of a contract, right? It's offer, acceptance, and then exchange of funds.
Yep.
Fundamentally.
Yep.
So let's say you're an MSP and you're like, hey, we should put out a newsletter, right? Really great idea. So if you're an MSP and you're listening and you're like, why does my CPA firm always send me these like ridiculous newsletters that nobody reads, right? When they're like, hey, make sure you read about this update to IRS Circular 247, blah, 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 blah. Right. And you're like, dude, even if I read this, I wouldn't understand it. Like, what's the point? Right. Maybe your law firm does it too. Entirely rational reason that they're doing that. What is it? Offer, acceptance, exchange of funds. They're saying, hey, here's an issue you should be aware of. If you want our help, please let us know. We may be able to assist you. Right. So now it's like, say, at least one or two of the three parts of a contract. So for an MSP, an easy thing to do is like, hey, here's supply chain attacks, right? Make sure that you're aware of this if you want some additional help. Or, hey, ransomware attacks are really, they're bumping up here. If you want some additional controls that maybe you don't have, please let us know. We'll do an analysis for you, right? To assist you to try and minimize the probability of a ransomware attack happening to your business. So what are you doing there? You're offering a contract, right? In a sense. So that way, if a claim hits your business, right, because of, let's say, a ransomware event, now at least you have some firepower. That's one of like 10 things I put in that video, right? You at least have something to push back on, because you can sit there and let's say it's the judge or the jury or, plaintiff's counsel, and you can say, I warned these guys. I offered to help them. They didn't want my help. Like, what else was I supposed to do? Right? So that's not saying that you're going to get out of a claim, but at least you have something to push back with.
Sure.
Right? So there's a bunch of different mechanisms that really, like, our traditional client base, architects, attorneys, engineers, lawyers, right? Those guys have been using for decades that MSPs have never arguably really needed to a large degree. But I think MSPs need to jump on that bandwagon, because what are you doing, right? Defense in depth for your business, right?
Yeah.
Not on the cyber side, but on the business side. So it's, hey, I offered to help. They didn't want my help. And oh, by the way, I contractually required cyber insurance, for example. They didn't get it. So they're in breach of contract. So there's a counterclaim, right? Or if they got the cyber insurance, right? Article 3 standing, which I hate to bore you, but once again, injury in fact, right? So they have to say like, hey, I was actually injured, right? They have to be able to point to somebody, right? To say my MSP injured me, right? But for their services or lack thereof, this never would have occurred. Mm-hmm. And then the third part is, if you pay me, I will be made whole again. So what are you doing with cyber insurance? You're taking away a lot of the big dollar claim stuff, right? When your client has cyber insurance, because the forensics costs, the business interruption, those are generally the biggest ones. Mm-hmm. Occasionally you'll talk ransomware payment. You're trying to take away those big elements of a claim, the big dollar stuff, right? So then it becomes really more of it becomes mathematical as opposed to emotional, right? It's not, oh my God, I'm out $1 million. It's, okay, now I could maybe sue my MSP for a lot of vanilla stuff, unjust enrichment, breach of contract, blah, 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 blah. All right, it might take $100,000 for me to sue my MSP, and maybe I'm only going to get like 20 grand out of it, right? Is that worth the effort to me as a business to do that? Or can I just soldier on and try and find that somewhere else?
Right. Now, I think you hit a good point, right? And I think that, we had this when we recently renewed our policy is, agreements and contracts and how important they are, reviewing those. Now and I might be going on a tangent, but when, let's say someone is approaching your company for, as far as the brokerage and understanding what they want to do, how often do agreements come up as you're looking to qualify them to see if they are able to get an insurance policy / do you have resources for them to either it's a partnering firm or you handle that with another division, et cetera, to better equip themselves in some type of term sheet, agreement, contract, depending on how they're running their IT business?
Yeah. So a couple questions inside of there. Agreements are now coming up all the time. 2 years, 18 months ago, insurance companies didn't really care. Now, yeah, you better have those agreements in place. If you are, I think a lot of MSPs came out of the break fix model.
Yeah.
Right. Where it was just kind of like shake and a nod, come in, you fix it, give me the bill, carry on smartly. Those days are over. So if you still have some of those legacy clients and you're like, how do I even broach this topic of we need a contract now? Is that going to spook my clients? Blah, blah, blah. Blame people like me. Blame the insurance companies, right? Be like, hey, I'm sorry. My insurance company says I have to do this. And frankly, they're going to tell you have to do that. And if you don't have a contract, you are screwed. I mean, I cannot emphasize that enough. It's he said versus she said. And oh, by the way, do you think you're going to go in front of a jury of people who don't understand technology and explain to them some super intricate detail that's very technical on why you were good and the other guy was bad? No, it's here's this technology company. They were supposed to keep me safe. Grandma's business got hit with ransomware. Like, you're just going to lose, right? Yeah. So if you don't have a contract, I mean, you're toast, just like kind of from the outset. With that, I know enough about contract law to be dangerous, right? But I'm not providing any legal advice. So, I am part of like Tech Tribe and MSP Tag and kind of some other trade groups out there that have invited me in. But one good resource is Don Geider, and that's spelled Geiter. And he is with, it's barley, like the grain, BARLEY.com. And what's great about him, I met him when I was getting my master's in cyber law, right? So he has one too. Mm-hmm. And he's a big firm in a small town who's worked with a bunch of other MSPs, right? Okay. So what I think MSPs kind of need to start realizing is it's not just the contract to begin with.
Yeah.
Right? It's looking forward and going, okay, cybersecurity regulations are only increasing, right? And each sector can have their own kind of specific laws. And with that, there could be specific requirements put on the MSP, or the MSP should be able to talk somewhat knowledgeably about some of those requirements, right? Once again, not giving legal advice, but, explaining to the client, hey, MFA, it's not only a good idea, it's not only affordable, it may also be a legal requirement. So talk to your attorney, but that kind of discussion really changes the environment that you operate in. Yeah. And so with someone like Don's group, I get no money recommending him, by the way. But what's cool is like he has all of those verticals in his firm, mm-hmm. right? So let's say you bring on a medical client, it's your first one. And you're like, well, now I'm a business associate of a covered entity under HIPAA High Tech. So like, what are my requirements as an MSP? Is this business associate agreement legit? Did they put something in there that I wouldn't even know about, that's going to screw my MSP over in the long run? That's where you could talk to Don. He'll bring in the healthcare partner and they could just iron all that stuff out. So he's a pretty good resource.
Cool. We'll make sure to put his info in the show notes as well.
Sure.
Awesome. I think going back to, like you mentioned, agreements and break fix, and I think what you've mentioned, and just clarify wrong, where obviously, right now on a liability standpoint, break fix you got to do something else in addition to mm-hmm. that. And I have felt that for a while now, because I think right now we have a few that are left that we're just waiting to wind out those blocks. And honestly, we've been passing them over to some of the smaller guys that want to take the risk. Mm-hmm. But I think for us, really understanding that piece of this needs to get done. And exactly like you said, we've been blaming our insurance provider as well for mm-hmm. a lot of the price increase, COVID, whatever the case may be. What are some of the strategies that you have seen for IT business owners where they know they need to do this, right? And they understand, mm-hmm. okay, I got to get my stuff together. I'm break fix. I need to go into this model. I'm already kind of in this model already. What would you say is the first step for them to kind of just understand what to move forward? Is it speak with their insurance provider / if they don't have one, speak with you, understand what they want to go from there, then speak to legal? Like, what would be those chain of events that you've seen a majority of the time that an IT business owner would take?
Yeah, so it's kind of a couple things all at once.
Sure.
right? It's one, you got to have those contracts, and they need to be legit. And I would just offer this. Once again, I get no money recommending Don. I just think he's a good dude. He's the attorney I would use if I had an MSP. But if you don't have the contracts in place, you're going to get screwed. And these are things that, your general business attorney down the street, he's not going to hop on Westlaw or LexisNexis and really get this, right? Like, it's kind of, there's only a couple people, I think, in the country that really kind of dial into that specific space for MSP. So please be careful there. With that, tech E&O insurance, right? And it's actually very basic. So I'm in process now of writing my 4th book. This one's going to be all about insurance for MSPs. But I would just say, when you're thinking about tech E&O insurance, it's really basic, right? If it was that hard, they wouldn't let guys like me do it. So what is tech E&O insurance? 2 sides, 4 buckets. That's it, right? First side, that's the liability side, errors and omissions. Somebody wants money from your business, right? What's the 80-20 of all this? Look at the definition of professional services. That is the heart of the E&O side of your policy. That's going to tell you what's covered and what's not covered. So somewhat counterintuitively, you want that to be as broad and as vague as possible. So if there's a list that's like professional services means XYZ, that's generally not as good as professional services includes but is not limited to XYZ, right? One, the latter is much broader. The other side of tech E&O, that's what we can think of as cyber insurance. And here's an easy way to explain it to people. 4 buckets at the end of the day. They all boil down to this. And I've looked at probably well over 200 different cyber insurance policy forms at this point. All right, what's number 1? Data breach, access and acquisition of information. Bunch of stuff falls down from there. Attorney, forensics, damage, data restoration, et cetera, business interruption, right? Bucket 2, ransomware, attorney, forensics, negotiator, extortion payment, restoration, business interruption, blah, blah, blah. Bucket 3, loss of funds, social engineering, reverse social engineering, wire fraud, bank fraud. There's a bunch of different terms for it. But just look what you got in there. See if that matches up with what your particular concerns are. Right? Bucket 4, miscellaneous stuff. And that really just depends on your MSP. Like, are you worried about bricking coverage? Well, if all of your stuff's in the cloud and you have your techs are running off like 4 PCs, right? Bricking coverage would cover your business if bad guy overwrites your firmware and turns your hardware into a brick, right? Hence bricking coverage. So if you're like, I got 4 PCs, that's not really a big deal. All my stuff's in the cloud. Well, all your stuff's in the cloud. Now you're dependent upon somebody else for your business to generate revenue. So something like dependent business interruption, dependent system failure, much, much more important for your business, right? So I would just say for the MSPs out there, understand what your concerns are, right? Even if you know nothing about insurance, right? Now you kind of have the framework for tech E&O, but understand what your concerns are. Make the insurance guy do their job, right? What is 99% of the insurance community? App comes in, nobody looks at it, goes to the underwriter, it comes back with a quote, they send it out to the person, it's on that person, right? Ask the insurance guy questions. Be like, hey, I'm worried about this type of loss, or what happens if this occurs, or I'm providing these services. Do you think that's actually going to be covered under the policy? And so that's really a great way to start. And then, yeah, so I'd say the legal side, right, have the contracts, the insurance side, make sure you're covered there. And then, obviously the lifeblood of any business is going to be marketing. So make sure you get the marketing side down. And I think that's what I would say.
And it's funny you say marketing, because I think John always used to say for many years now, where I think he attended one session where, marketing on a website can make or break you also when it comes to representation, understanding what you're doing. So like protecting, prevention, instead of saying mitigation, items like that to limit your liability. And even down to the point where we were listening to a podcast recently where it says, hey, on your communications out, let them know that the services and liability of your vendors and understanding what they are going through. It's, providing that transparency to help give you some type of a fighting chance as well. So for sure, as far as marketing, I don't think that's talked about a lot. I think a lot of people just try to make it nice, flashy, and they're going to be the one-stop shop. But even down to a vendor like Huntress have said, it's not a fact of if, it's when, and how fast are you going to get that customer back up and running. So definitely a good point. All right. We're going to take a quick break. We'll go ahead and gather our last thoughts. For anyone that's in the chat, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in there. But if you would like to support the show, go to patreon.com/MSP Unplugged. It's about $1 a show. And what that will gain you access to is the ability to access our private Facebook group. You'll be able to gain access to early information, details as far as like this event, other shows that are coming up, and guests that will be appearing in the following show, and a great close-knit community that allows for really no BS. It's really a place of learning, and we really make sure that, there is no stupid question. It's always a learning atmosphere, and we really appreciate those that are in there. We appreciate those that have newly supported us. And of course, for everyone, we also want to thank those that continuously support us. So if you are interested, head over to patreon.com/MSP Unplugged, and we would appreciate it. All right. So I don't see any questions in the chat right now. Give a couple minutes there. Joe, is there any final thoughts that you want to kind of share, just to drive this home on whether that's, what your business is offering / just some tidbits that maybe we didn't cover?
Yeah. So I'd say as we're talking about insurance, right. And I think we're going to put in the show notes here that defense in depth piece that I put out. So obviously you want to do everything you can to not use your insurance. That being said, you need to think of your insurance policy as a legal contract. Okay. So within that legal contract, there's kind of like a couple things you need to understand. There's the application, which business owners freak out over, right? And understandably so. Make sure if you're filling out that application, there's nothing that says you can't just add an addendum to the end to explain an answer to a question. So something ridiculous like, let's say they ask, do you adhere to the NIST cybersecurity framework? And you're like, how does anybody answer that truthfully? Right? Because there's so many parts to it. Some may not be applicable to your business, like et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Right? So instead of answering yes or no, just add an addendum at the end. The policy, that's what people like me nerd out over. But what's most likely going to happen? So business owners are always worried, hey, is the insurance company going to screw me over and deny a claim because of some weird little loophole in the policy somewhere? And that's what I thought too when I got into the industry, was they're going to have some brilliant legal counsel who's like, oh, well, this is a semicolon, not a comma. And because of that, they have some novel legal construction to deny coverage. It's actually way simpler than that. So what's most likely going to happen is an MSP is going to screw themselves. And this is the conversation I have with every single client of mine. It's at the end of the day, here's what a claim is. Right? There's like a whole list of things: demand for arbitration, mediation, blah, blah, blah. Right? Generally, demand for money or services. If a lawsuit hits your desk, probably the first thing you're going to do is call the insurance guy. Right? Like, that's not many businesses miss that.
Yeah.
What's going to screw you is the idea of a potential claim. So inside of your policy, there's all kinds of exclusions, right? One of the most important ones is you are required to report all circumstances which may reasonably bring rise to a future claim before your policy renews. So that means if you are aware of any circumstance which could bring rise to a future claim, it's not a claim yet, you have to report that before you renew your insurance policy, because if it later becomes a claim, guess what else your policy says? Hey, by the way, you have to assist with the investigation of this claim. So they're going to know if you knew about something before you renewed your policy, right? You're toast. And the term reasonableness, that's a legal term. That's not what we think of as like human beings, right? The legal world is completely different. So if you're an MSP out there and you're listening, here's probably the biggest thing I think you should take away. Just because it wasn't your fault doesn't mean it's not your problem. Why do your clients hire you? They don't want to know about any of this stuff. They don't want to learn about network architecture and defense in depth and NIST versus ISO, right? And all of these technicalities. You and I nerd out on that stuff, right? We think it's cool and interesting. Your clients hire you because they don't want to know that type of information. So what happens in the absence of knowledge? Emotional response. So let's say your client gets hit with ransomware and you're sitting there and you're going, well, I looked at our contracts, right? Like I looked at the MSA and the service level agreement or the statement of work. And, you know, I had warned them that this was going to be a problem. And it turned out their CFO was going against their own computer use policy and was cruising Facebook over her lunch break, clicked on an ad doing something she wasn't supposed to do. Through a series of events, some payload came into their system. They got hit with ransomware. So you're thinking from a technical perspective. You're going, this was not my fault. Your clients who don't have that knowledge are thinking about this from an emotional perspective. And they're going, these guys were supposed to keep me safe. I don't care how this works. I don't want to learn how this works. Boom, you got a problem, right? So just because someone in this circumstance hasn't come after you yet doesn't mean that they won't come after you later.
Sure.
So make sure you just keep that in mind. If you have a circumstance you reasonably believe that could come back on your business, you got to report that before you renew your insurance policy. Obviously, read your own policy terms, generally as soon as possible or practicable. Because if you don't, it doesn't matter how many little Gucci features I get in your policy, right? It doesn't matter how low we drive that premium or whatever the case may be. If you don't just adhere to the basic terms of that legal contract, right, your responsibilities, high probability you're going to get burned, right? So that's just kind of one of those factoids that if nobody told you, you probably wouldn't know. That's the most common reason you're going to be denied coverage. So don't freak out too much about all the policy features and widgets. You're probably going to screw yourself. So please make sure you keep that in mind. Don't get burned.
I think that is causing everyone to relook at their policies. And if you're not, definitely go ahead and reach out to your insurance provider. But if for those that want to reach out to you and maybe get an overview / maybe want to enroll in your services, what's the best way for them to reach out to you? And then we'll also put any of that information in the show notes as well.
Sure. So they can shoot me an email, joseph@thebrunsgroup.com. They can hit me up on Reddit, which is where I think I gained probably the most notoriety. I'm Joe_cyber. Occasionally get some people popping in from that. They can hit me up on LinkedIn. They can hit me up on YouTube. I got my own channel there. It's just Joseph Brunsman. You can find all my stuff there. I have a whole playlist. It's probably like 30 videos or something now just for MSPs. And yeah, that'd probably be the best way to reach out. And if anyone's interested, actually, that book called Damage Control, if you go to thebrunsgroup.com/book2, you can actually just download it for free. So you can get all 500 pages of awesomeness, guaranteed to put your kids to sleep. I've tried that out myself. There's a ton of information in there that should help everybody out.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Joe, I really appreciate you coming on. I think that, like I said, we heard your interview. I knew we had to bring you onto the show. John was the one that poked me to make sure that we got you on the show. So appreciate him pressing me to make sure that we did. Really appreciate your expertise. I think hopefully our audience learned a lot and got a lot out of this. If for some reason we get some more additional questions and it turns out, or if you happen to see anything coming through the pipeline, we'd love to have you back on. But really appreciate you making the time.
Hey, thanks, Paco. Appreciate you having me.
Sounds good. And for those if you'd like to come join us every Tuesday at noon Eastern, 11 Central, watch live and hang out in the chat room over at youtube.com/MSP Unplugged. Subscribe and hit the notification button so you never miss an episode. Use your favorite podcasting app to take us with you wherever you go. We are on Amazon Music, Spotify, and on Apple Podcast. And of course, thank you for listening. We will see you next time on MSP Unplugged.